in Tibetan. Therefore, we use Tashi Lake instead of saying hello. But they don't have this in Tibetan. Actually, it's only for Losar today. Like today, we did a puja with the whole community, and the two geshes were there. And then Geshe is always expressing this Tashi Lake and what it means and how it has to do with practice also and so forth. Anyway, Happy New Year.
Shortly, can you say what it means?
Yeah, so the Dashi is actually meaning auspiciousness. Yeah, and then the Delek has two parts. Deva is happiness and Lek is excellence. Yeah, Lekpa is excellence. So from anything, from all the causes, karmic causes of virtue, as something being something auspicious, you gain all the happiness and everything excellent. This is how Geshe explains it. I think this is already a quite strong Dharma interpretation, and normal Tibetan will not understand that. So actually, literally means just auspiciousness, happiness, and everything positive. Tashi Delek.
Okay, thank you.
And so we have something very auspicious today because we're going to talk about the teachings of the Buddha. It's amazing. Very good.
Thank you for teaching us.
So last time we were talking about the life of the Buddha and how the life of the Buddha is already indicating a lot of things about the path, how we can relate to the Buddha's life story and get inspired for some very core spiritual topics, like, for example, giving up the world in order to completely engage into a life of spirituality, how to actually look for the correct method and the correct teacher, by way of checking out different teachers and different methods, and then analyzing and also rejecting. If you have analyzed and found it is not going far enough, it's not deep enough. Like the Buddha first studied with some concentration masters, then he did some asceticism, and finally he did his own path to really find the state of liberation or even of complete enlightenment. So all of this is there, and then especially the strong point that the Buddha after that was not simply enlightened and stayed in this state, but he then reached out to the whole human community and was teaching what he has found, was teaching the path. And he was teaching this not kind of within a year or two or five, but for decades, for many, many tens and tens of years. He was again and again teaching and practicing together with the people to really instruct them. So this is the activity of the highest being in the universe. The Buddhas, which are all pervasive love and compassion, unconditional love and compassion, and which are pervading with their omniscience all places, all phenomena, which are knowing us completely, without judging us, without rejecting us, knowing about our faults, knowing about our good sides, knowing about our potentials, knowing much more about us than we know about ourselves. So this force in the universe is full of love and compassion, and the main activity that it wants to do is to teach us. Was to teach us in order to instruct us what we can do with our capacities, what we can do with our mind, and what kind of potentials we have, and how to actualize these potentials, and what kind of problems we have also, and what's the root of these problems, and how to eliminate that. So this is what love and compassion in its highest form actually wants to do. It wants to be with us and wants to teach us. So the teachings of the Buddha is the most precious thing that we ever received from being on that level of complete enlightenment. They talk about the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, and they say the Buddha's body is very, very beautiful if you would encounter a Buddha, but that in itself will not help you with all your problems, like that you are critical of others, that you are lonely, that you are dying, that you are getting sick, that you have this human body and so forth, that you have to take rebirth, that you often confused about what's the next step to do, that you are desirous, attached, jealous, and what. So with all this, the beauty of the Buddha's body does not help you. And the mind of the Buddha, the omniscient mind, the unconditional love, is even beyond our perception. We cannot read anybody's mind, and far from being able to read the mind of the Buddha. What is really liberating us, is really blessing us, is really healing us, is the speech of the Buddha. His teaching is healing us. So therefore, this is a very core thing in the Buddha's life story, that he was after enlightenment teaching for so many decades. For I'm not sure myself now, but 30 years, 30 years or 40 years, something like that, a long, long time. So the teachings are the Buddha was teaching on all different aspects of human psychology, of human mind's potential, of spirituality, of practices, all kind of things. And he's always doing this. He's in a state so advanced that he's not kind of presenting a logical system and just repeats it again and again, but he is reacting out from the core of his heart to the person in front of him. So if he meets somebody, or let's say somebody comes to see the Buddha and has a question, the Buddha will react, which is that without even thinking, like spontaneously manifest that what is most beneficial for that person. So over all these decades of teaching, in this way, the teachings appeared by the Buddha teaching to different communities, to his monks, to nuns, to lay people, to people from other religions, some maybe to gods or to beings of other realms, non-human beings and so forth. And so there was a great variety of teachings coming about, and they were all remembered by the practitioners of that time and handed down to us in this to this present age. But in between, Buddhism changed a lot. It changed from a first a state where, together with the Buddha, the people were in the forest, practicing in the forest, having left householder life, as this is called, begging monks, wandering monks, and so forth. And then at one point, something new appeared, which was monasteries. So we don't have the time to go into this, but it's actually quite interesting how this came about, because first they were wandering monks living in the forest, and then all of a sudden they had a place where they stayed, in a monastery. This happened even during the time of the Buddha. So in this monastery, then great scholastic or great traditions of study developed. And then the people started to organize all these many teachings. So to this person, the Buddha said at that time this and this, and to that person he said that and that. So how does this relate to each other? What's the for a normal practitioner today, that we are not encountering a Buddha that is spontaneously speaking to us, giving the teaching that love and compassion would spontaneously manifest just for us. So we rely to all that what the Buddha has taught there. So the question is, what is there a sequence with regard to all these kind of different teachings that he was talking about? He was talking about generosity, he was talking about compassion, he was talking about wisdom, he was talking about our clinging for permanence with things that are impermanent. He was talking about that we do a lot of projections on other people, on things, on ourselves, and so on, that we basically don't understand who we are, how we exist, how the universe exists. He was talking about anger, he was talking about all kind of things. So is there a sequence to these many topics, or do we have to learn all of them and then somehow deal with them all at the same time? So what developed over the years was something which we would today call the Lamrim tradition. So Lamrim is a Tibetan, and it's called the translation of that would be the graduated path, or the stages of the path. So the title already gives it away. What it is a presentation of the complete path of the complete teachings of the Buddha, the meaning, the essence of it, in a kind of a sequence. And so there is a perception of different fields or groups of teachings that are presented by way of what kind of attitude you would have in order to take this group of teachings as your main practice. So what I'm saying with this is that spiritual practitioners can have different motivations, or different like motivation in the sense of what moves them to practice actually. So there is a so-called small scope being, and the middle scope being, and the great scope being. The small scope being is actually already doing quite some spiritual stuff. It's going already way beyond what normal people, what ordinary people do that are not concerned with spirituality. So that is called small scope being, is just in relation to this even higher motivations of spirituality that follow afterwards. But it is in itself already something very precious. So I think I go quickly through these three, and then we're going to talk mainly today about the small scope being here. The small scope being is actually completely aware, like moved by the insight that he or she will die, and he's also aware that mind is indestructible. Yeah, so you can never die such that mind ends. So in the end, death is simply an experience. It's going to be a traumatic experience. It's going to be a complete transformation experience, and And then afterwards, there will be other experiences. So mind will go on, will experience something very different from what we experience right now, and so forth. But this person is aware that there will be death. Death can happen any moment, even. It will be a dramatic change, but the mind won't end. And then he will also ask himself the question, so what then will be the experiences after death? And can I influence what kind of experience I have after death? So the experience after death would be a next birth. So what kind of birth are there? And can I do something about this, that the process turns out well for me? Because the very basis of the Buddha's teaching is that all beings want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. This is something to recall again and again. This is why we practice Buddhism, for that reason. We don't practice Buddhism because the Buddha said so, or because the Buddha is the highest being and we have to study his teachings. We study Buddhism because we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. We can bring this to a higher level where we understand that everybody wants to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, so we can also work for them. But in the end, it's all about this. It's about the potential of the mind to be blissful, free, happy, open, creative, loving, kind, and so forth. So for that reason, we practice Buddhism. So here, the small scope being goes so far that he says, I want to actually face this topic, this inevitable topic of death, which is kind of part of all our life. It cannot be cut off from it. It's simply happening. Everybody who is born in the way that we were born will have to die. So I'm not going to kind of just say like, well, that's how it is, and I don't want to think about it, but quite the opposite. I want to think about it. I want to know, how does death work out? What's the process of death? What's the mind in death? What's the experience of death? And where does this lead afterwards, as the mind cannot be destroyed by death? Then how is this that what kind of experience come afterwards, and can I influence these experiences afterwards? Can I influence my next life, or even my next lives, maybe hundreds or thousands of them into the future? So that's what this person is especially interested in. And by what he understands from the Buddha's teaching about all these processes of death and rebirth and re-death and rebirth, he will then start to practice in accordance with that. So that's the kind of level that he is interested in. He's interested in dealing with this fact of life that he's going to die, and he wants to be a master of death. He wants to master his death so that he becomes completely in charge of being able to manipulate the stream of his consciousness so that there's a good rebirth. That's an incredible spiritual act if somebody goes so far, has this kind of understanding of his mind, of the processes of death, and how the mind can develop and how it can be influenced, and the workings of the mind. So this will be also a lot about karma. So here somebody can practice for that reason. He understands that this life is very short. Yeah, let's say he comes to spirituality when he's in his 40s or in his 50s even. So he doesn't even have too much lifetime left. So he understands this life is going to be very short. It is almost, how I say, pointless to try to do many things that have only results within this life. So he takes a very vast, almost like a cosmic perspective, and says, I want to use the rest of my life in order to really bring about great results with regard to future lifetimes. Yeah, really looking into the far distant future. What I'm saying is not that he's not thinking about the next life, but he's thinking about the next life, but not just about the next life. He will learn techniques to influence many, many lives into the future. So this is what he's going to do. So that's quite an incredible being. But the middle being, the middle scope being, goes beyond that. He does not just want to become a master of his death. He doesn't want to be able to manipulate or kind of deal with death. The middle scope being is getting a group of teachings from the Buddha that the Buddha gave in order to point out that actually the whole cycle of being born in the way that we are born, which is carrying the seed of having to die, and then having to be born again, which is carrying the seed of having to die, and so forth. Yeah. So this recurring cycle of being born and dying and reborn and redying and again reborn and again redying, this, which is what is described as samsara, this can be ended. This circle can be broken. We can die such that we don't have to take a rebirth. Or we can change ourselves such that we are no longer in this state of being alive, such that being alive means having to die. You can be alive without having to die. That's what the Buddha is saying. You can be eternally alive, not in the way that we are alive now, but there is a state where you can be free from this endless dying and reborn and redying and so forth. And so this state is described as being incredibly free, incredibly clear, incredibly joyful, blissful, incredibly peaceful. So all the factors that are binding us right now into this cycle of death and rebirth, into this samsara, all these factors, all the causes of samsara can be completely destroyed. So the person of the middling scope is listening to this kind of teachings of the Buddha and is checking them if that is really true. Because what the Buddha is saying here is amazing. We can destroy death. We can become living beings without death. So that's something quite a mouthful to say. So that needs to be checked. So he checks these teachings, and he deals with these teachings, he deals with all the reasons that the Buddha gives, the description that the Buddha gives. And when he gets convinced that this is actually possible, then he engages in very strong practice, aiming at liberating himself from samsara and gaining the peace and the everlasting bliss of nirvana. So nirvana actually means blown out. I once read this somewhere in Sanskrit. It's a Sanskrit term. It's not a Tibetan term. It's a Sanskrit term. And it means blown out. All the factors that keep us in samsara are blown out. So there's a complete liberation, complete freedom, and escaping from samsara into the state of where all these factors are blown out, peace, being alive without having ever to die, and so forth. So that's quite far-reaching. This is quite an amazing scope, and we can maybe already feel that this is by far vaster than the attitude of the small being that was simply trying to become a master of his death and understand the process of death and influence future rebirths. So the second one is saying, like, I don't want future rebirth. I want to be living in a completely different way without any kind of death or birth. So that's the middling scope and the small scope, the difference here. Both are already exceptional spiritual attitudes, such that normal people don't have them. And this is actually one of the main practices in Buddhism, to actually simply generate the attitude of these kind of beings, or middle scope being, small scopes being, or middle scope being. But the Tibetan Buddhism is actually of the type of Buddhism which is called Mahayana, the great vehicle. And it's called the great vehicle as opposed to the small, or the, how you say, modest vehicle, because of the aim. The Mahayana, so this is the third group of teachings of the Buddha. The Mahayana teachings are aiming at that we are not just improving our own situation, but that we actually completely transform ourselves into limitless and unconditional love and compassion. And we are experiencing the world and the universe and other people and such that they are the important ones to work for, not myself. It's not about liberating myself. It's not about manipulating my own development in death and rebirth and so forth. It's not about liberating myself. It is actually understanding the fundamental likeness or sameness between me and all other living beings, that it is more important to work for them than to work for myself. So just to shock nobody, to work for others will include that you work with yourself. You will have to learn much more skills. You will have to purify your mind and develop your mind greatly in order to have the capacity to actually help others. And so this person will generate an attitude of so-called great compassion. He will see very clearly the suffering of all the other sentient beings, and he will have a very strong, by practicing long time, it's not easy to attain, he will practice for a long time and attain the state of great compassion, where he or she wants to actually liberate the other beings out of their suffering, and then understands that in order to do so, he would have to completely purify his own continuum and completely activate all positive potential that are there in the mind right now. And what that means is by complete purification, you attain the state of a Buddha. By complete manifestation of all the good qualities, you attain the state of a Buddha. So the Buddha state is actually, to some extent, defined or described by complete abandonment of all stains in the mind and complete realization of all positive qualities. So there's no higher qualities that could be attained. The Buddha has attained all those. So this being of the great scope, the Mahayana practitioner, he wants to actually become a Buddha. But he doesn't want to become a Buddha because he wants to be outstanding or shiny or the highest being in the universe or something like that. He wants to become a Buddha to have the capacity of a Buddha in order to help all beings that he completely understands are exactly like him in their capacity to be happy and to abandon all the roots of suffering. So he wants to actually set all beings into the highest bliss of a Buddha. In order to do that, he himself wants to attain the capacity of a Buddha to bring this about. So this is really an attitude which I have to say I didn't find them, personally speaking, in any other religion. This is so far-reaching, and I'm only starting to understand after all these years here in the monastery. I'm only starting to understand what this is actually about, what this is actually saying, because it's even hard to grasp what this mind is about. Like what a Buddha is about, and what a mind that is moved by compassion is about, that wants to become a Buddha and so forth. So this is really an outstanding level of spiritual practice of this great being, this great scope being of the Mahayana. So the Lamrim is actually a teaching of the Mahayana. So therefore, the Lamrim is not aiming at us becoming beings of the small scope. The Lamrim is not aiming at us becoming beings of the middling scope. The Lamrim is from the outset set on us becoming Mahayana practitioner, people of the great scope. So therefore, when the first and second group of teachings that come from the Buddha, the first and second group of practices that come from the Buddha are presented, then they are called practices that we have in common with a being of the small scope. Yeah, so it's not presented the practice of the small scope, because that's not our topic. The topic is how the Mahayana person, somebody who is practicing as a practitioner of the great scope, he will also have to rely on those practices of somebody of the small scope, on the middle scope, yeah, to some extent. Of course, not with regard to the motivation, because the motivation he's generating is much faster. But all the other things, like that there's rebirth, what kind of rebirth are possible, that there's karma, that there is a root of samsara, that this can be abandoned, and so forth. All these teachings of the small and middle scope, also the great scope being will reflect on, and so forth. So that's just an overview of a rough overview of the Lamrim. And so I would like to use this session and the next two sessions to simply go progressively through these stages and just kind of quickly cover all the different practices that a small scope being is doing today, and the next time the middle scope, and then the third time the great scope. And I thought we have a fourth session also. I would like to talk about exactly that, what I just said, how these different levels of practice are connected to each other and how they are based on each other and so forth. So we can then see how this goes back and forth and so forth. All right. So let's talk about this person who is living in the very world that we are also living. He is having all these beautiful opportunities of education, and then job, and then making money and driving that whatever is his favorite car, or doing certain sports, or being focused on relationships in this life and so forth. Yeah? So this person living in this kind of world gets so far that he is actually thinking this life is not so important. I actually want to work with regard to future lives. So obviously this is not a very obvious way of thinking. Yeah? I don't think anyone around us thinks like that. Normally people are really dealing with death as acknowledging that it exists, but what to do? And not much to do really. Unless you're following a religion, like if you would be a very strong Christian, you might also have this attitude. What is really important is the eternity with God. and not this life. Yeah, so I don't have to get completely hung up in this life. Same probably for a Muslim or for a Jewish person or from Hinduism and so forth. So here, this practitioner of the first level, he is actually thinking about death. He is aware that death will terminate all the relationships of this life. It will terminate all the relation that you have with possessions, with objects. You will completely lose everything that you're relying on right now, including like you rely, let's say, on certain clothing, on certain housing, on certain let's say again car or mobility or money or whatever, food and so forth. So you will have no access to any of this. Death will completely kind of pull you out of this. But it's even worse than that. Like you would rely on clothing in order to keep your body warm, or you would eat something in order to enjoy it or to feed your body or something like that. But actually, you will not even have the body. You will even lose the body. You will have virtually nothing left. So this is what this person is reflecting on. Yeah, that this kind of complete well, I guess, traumatizing or completely shocking experience of losing everything, every relationship, every resource, and even the body. He thinks about what does this mean. He's aware that there is such a traumatic change coming. He's also reflecting on that this change might happen today. Yeah, so none of us here in this room or hear me on this side of the screen can be sure that we're going to leave this room alive. People are dying while we are speaking, and they're dying of the most incredible causes. Yeah, they're choking on something, or they're slipping and they break their skull. Most bizarre ways of dying all the time, as we're speaking right here. People die of sicknesses that they were not aware of. Yeah? They have a stroke. Nobody had kind of a warning before. It was not a letter arriving like today you're going to have a stroke. It's happening. It's simply happening. People just collapse. And they might die right there. So this might happen to us. None of us here, I don't know if I will have a stroke during the session. You people don't know if you have a stroke during the session. So that's pretty how I say, irritating to say, to think that you could die just now. You could, it would be this tremendous change in your experience, in what it means that you are alive, in all your relationships, could happen right now, could happen within the next 5 minutes. Well, it could happen in the next 5 minutes, definitely could happen in the next hour or today. So that's what he's thinking about. Yeah? He's thinking about how there is death, first of all. So he is courageous enough to take this topic that everybody else tries to avoid talking about. He takes that and looks at it. And he also takes this that he could die any moment, and he's not playing around with likeliness or something. It's not likely that I die today because statistics show this and this. Whoever dies right now from joking on some kind of food or something like this, is simply dying. It doesn't matter what the statistics are saying. He's simply dead now. He is that 1%. So for him, this type of death is not 1%, it's 100%. It happened to him. It's just done. It's not about likeliness. It's just happening. It's just the reality of that individual. So thinking about all of this, this practitioner is then going further, and so we're talking here about an Asian context, yeah. So the Buddhism coming out of Asia, out of India. So for India, it is already very clear that mind is something very different from matter. That therefore it doesn't share the destiny or what happens to the body. It does not necessarily have to happen to the mind. So if the body dies, is dissolving, that doesn't mean that the mind has to die or dissolve. Like the body dissolves such that in the end it's completely gone. There's just nothing left. Yeah? Even the bones might dissolve and so forth. So the mind is also tremendously changing, but it stays mind and it continues. So it's not dying in the sense of how the body is dying. So that's already established for Asia and so forth. So then from there, many things follow. For example, that mind is an impermanent phenomenon. It's changing all the time. We constantly have different experiences. We constantly have different objects that we are perceiving and so forth. So this shows that mind is not something static that's just sitting there. That mind, for example, cannot exist without an object. Yeah? Something is always perceived. Mind is being aware of something. Yeah? The definition of mind is that which is clear and knowing. So there's always a knowledge about something. Might be an inner phenomenon. Yeah? It might be, for example, your breath is to some extent inner. It might be a knowledge about your feelings and so forth. There might be just kind of some appearances, like in a dream. You might just have dream appearances, or it might be an awareness of an outer object. But there's always an awareness of something. So if this something changes, the mind changes. But the mind is impermanent. That's an important point. In Buddhism, they are teaching that whatever is impermanent because it is coming from causes. It is arising in a certain form due to certain causes and conditions, and it's transforming into the next state because of certain causes and conditions. So therefore, the mind is impermanent. The mind comes from causes and conditions. The present moment of mind has conditions one moment before that produce the present moment. And then the previous moment had also this kind of causes. So Buddhism would talk about different types of causes. There's some causes which are contributing, like conditions that are contributing for a certain result. And then there's other causes which are of the same substance. Yeah. So, or let's say of the same type. So in order for the mind to be produced in a certain moment, like let's say in the present moment, you have to have something that is of the type of mind before that becomes the so-called substantial cause for the present moment. So that's quite important, because what Buddhism is saying, in order for there to be mind right now in that specific shape, in this specific form, you have to have a previous moment of mind that was of a different shape and of a different form, and that was understanding something different, that was feeling in a different way, and so forth, was differently clear or unclear, dull or sharp. But there has to be something like that in order for there to come the present moment in its form. Yeah, so mind is produced from mind. And this mind is shaped by other conditions as well, like, for example, the object. Of course, obviously, if let's say you have been seeing something green before and now you see something red, then obviously this change in experience is coming also from a change of the object. But that there is an experience of another object is because, in general, there was experience, or that what is clear knowing, or mind before. So mind produces mind, but the specifics of it come then from many other conditions. So the main point is, again, mind is impermanent, mind has causes, mind has as its substantial cause of the present moment, as a substantial cause, a previous moment of mind. So for India and so forth, this is all pretty established. It's just in the West, we might have to do this extra step of actually making clear to ourselves that mind is not a material phenomenon. It is definitely not the brain. It is not the nervous system and so forth. And we can use many things for that, like, for example, many proofs or many thoughts, let's say trains of thoughts. For example, there's a famous quote, or let's say statement by one of the great yogis of Tibet, Milarepa. So Chaitanya Milarepa said to one of his disciples, he sent him off to meditate in a cave on the following question: what color is your mind? So that's an interesting question. What color is the mind, you know? I mean, you can have a mind that sees red or green or blue or yellow, but what's the color of the mind? The object can be all kind of colors, but the object can also be something which is not a color. Let's say a consciousness that apprehends sound, that hears a melody. It doesn't have any object which is color. So what color is an ear consciousness apprehending a symphony? What's the color of mind? So the answer is pretty difficult, because probably the mind, like oneself would think like the mind should have some color, I guess, or maybe some shape or something. But it is an immaterial phenomenon. It does not have a shape. It does not have a color. So that's something to think about. It's quite interesting, because the brain has a color. So if the mind is the brain, then the answer is very clear. The color of the mind is something grayish or is it pinkish, I'm not sure. So whatever is the color of the brain. And when you ask yourself, what shape is the mind? Well, that's very clear. It has this kind of shape like a brain. But is that the case? So again, what color is your mind? So that's one thing. Then the other thing, of course, that works maybe quite well for us Westerners, don't seem the Tibetan geshes are so keen on this, but there is all these experiences where people had operations, and during these operations, they kind of the machines were showing that the heart stopped and then the brain stopped and so forth, and so science clearly was the scientists means the doctors that were present were clearly of the opinion this person is dead. There is nothing to be measured on this person anymore. Nothing in the organism, nothing in the brain. There's no activity. This person is dead. The machines that what tests truth for scientists or for medics were clearly proving this person is dead. And so the machines turn on at one point again, and there is again brain activity, and there is again heart activity, and so forth. And so, kind of miraculously for the doctors, the person came back. The person was clearly said this person is dead. Like they would say things like during the operation, saying like we lost him, and then he comes back. And then not only that, so that's pretty difficult to explain how somebody who is dead comes back. But not only that, but when the person came back out of the operation, he was telling them what they were saying. He had an out-of-body experience during that time where the machines were saying that he's brain dead and heart dead and the organism is dead, and where the doctors were clear this person has died now. So not only was he kind of in a very deep coma or kind of unmeasurable subtle or something, but he was very clearly hearing what they were saying, obviously not through the ears. That's also interesting. When he heard what they were saying there in the operation room, by what did he hear that? With his ears? With the brain? But the brain was brain dead. So how did he hear that? He was stating to them exactly who did what and what they were saying. So anyway, there's this case, probably you have heard about this. So it's very interesting to deal with them and think about what this all is implying. And what this is all implying will not be told to you by science. You have to think about it yourself. So what I would say, what this is strongly implying is that there is a mind that is different from the body. So maybe just on a side note, from a Buddhist point of view, this person would not have been dead. So our Geshe was making this once very clear. If somebody dies, then there is no way of coming back. So this mind was obviously in a very subtle state. This mind was able to perceive on a very different level than we normally perceive and so forth. But if the mind would have actually died, it would have gone down to the subtlest level of mind and would have left the body and would not be able to come back. This karmic connection would have been cut and it would go to another life. So this is not what happens there. But still, what is happening is that we have a mind that, according to science, is no longer connected to the body. The body is dead. And we have a very clear experience. It's not even a dream experience. When we dream something, then sometimes it's difficult later on to relate what happened there because it was so crazy. But this was a very clear experience. It was a very awake, clear experience. So this is something we can think along in order to establish for us what is already established for India, which is that the mind is not the body. Then the next thing is to think about this stuff like that the mind is impermanent. It's not kind of a permanent thing sitting there and is already mind or consciousness. And then an object comes along and then this consciousness is already consciousness is seeing that. It's not like this. There is only consciousness if there is an object. Yeah, consciousness is not a permanent thing there, but it is interconnected to other things. It is an awareness of something. So there needs to be something in order for there to be this awareness. Exactly what I'm trying to say. I'm saying like this: the mind is not just hanging there. This is permanently sitting there, and then as an object comes along, something happens. But it is defined through the object. So the mind, from that point of view, is not permanent. The mind is a product. The mind is depending on previous moments of mind. The mind is depending on the object, on many other things, and so forth. So in this context, we can understand, like if you want to see how impermanent the mind is, you can do some meditation on the breath or any kind of concentration meditation. Yeah? Try to focus. You will see that the mind is actually completely out of control. Yeah, we will have strong problems to focus. The mind will constantly run somewhere else. So you will get a certain taste, at least, of the so-called coarse impermanence of the mind. The point is this, that the mind has as its cause not something material. It has as its cause another mind. Yeah, so this is a very, very important thing to think about and to maybe also establish for oneself, because the reason with regard to establishing past and future lives goes like this, that this mind that we have right now is very different in its knowledge and its capacity from the mind that we had when we were 12. But it's the same continuity of mind. It's not that we are now somebody else's mind and the one who was 12 here was yet another mind. It is the same mind stream. It's the same continuity. It's the same string, if you like. It is this life, but it is very different. It has changed a lot. It has changed because it's not permanent, it's impermanent. So maybe there might be a misunderstanding. Permanent does not mean that like there's a difference between permanent and eternal. The mind is eternal. It is without beginning and without end. It will never be destroyed. But this doesn't make it permanent. Permanent is something that doesn't change at all. It is something also that is not produced from causes and conditions. So the mind is something eternal that is impermanent. It is eternally changing. It is coming from an eternity of change and is changing through this moment into an eternity of future. So maybe that's important to understand the difference between eternity and permanent. So the mind is forming kind of this string of moments that are producing each other. So as I said, like in a coarse way, what the mind that we have today is very different from the mind of the 12-year-old. But the mind of the 12-year-old also is very different from the mind of a 3-year-old, or maybe a 1-year-old that can't even speak. Or then somebody who is just some weeks old and doesn't, like there's this phenomenon that babies are lying there on their towel or bed or whatever, and they're moving all the time, so they're using their body. But there is a moment, seems like, in the development of the young child, of the young baby, where the baby is at one point holding its hands in front of his face and is staring at them, as if it is trying to understand, what's this? So the baby already uses this, but it doesn't know it. So there was a moment of mind where this being did not understand even its body parts, something obvious like the hands or something like this. So that mind is different from somebody who is 12 years old or 3 years old. A 3-year-old knows what his hands are. So then you have that one who is in the state of having just been born. But then you had already the baby or the fetus in the womb, and it was kicking and it was reacting to things. I think my mother told me something about that I was a very quiet baby, didn't kick much, and she had to go to a dentist during her pregnancy, and she was very afraid of the pain. This was somewhere in the, I don't know, what was that, I was born 69, so it must have been like 68 or whatever. Yeah. So I don't know if the dentists were so advanced as they are today. So it was maybe quite an experience to go to the dentist at that time. So she was afraid. And when she was really afraid, this is when the baby was kicking right there. So there was seems to be a connection. I mean, it's just my own story. Probably there's thousands of stories like this from other people. There's a connection between the baby kicking and perceiving something that's happening with the mother, for example. So I would say this is an indication of that this fetus in the womb has mind, is afraid of something, is using the body, wants something or doesn't want something, wants to get rid of something, wants to fight a danger that is not even aware of. But this mind must be so different of our mind, of the 12-year-old mind, of the 3-year-old mind, of the mind that is just some weeks old. is living there in this darkness, or I don't know what the light is in there. Can it even see? I mean, at one point it can see, like if you go further down the development of the fetus and so on. So there's all these different minds, and they get more and more bizarre as you go down to the development of the process of the fetus into increasingly younger states. So you have this development of all these minds that are changing strongly, very, very different minds. But they are connected to each other. They are the cause for each other. The respectively later minds are based on the previous ones and so forth. So there's this continuity. But this mind of the fetus has transformed, has changed, has dissolved into a later state of mind. So the mind of the fetus is no longer present. There's only the mind of the 3 weeks old, or the 3-year-old, or the 12-year-old, or of us today. And when we're going to be 80, or I hope we get 80 or more, even in good health, I have to say. So if we reach that state, that mind will be caused by our present mind, but it will not be the present mind. It will have changed. It will be a moment of mind in that continuity, not in somebody else's continuity. It's going to be of us, but it's going to be a different mind. It's going to have changed. So that's the important part about the impermanence of mind, how previous moments of mind are causing the present ones, how the present ones are an effect of previous ones, but are themselves a cause for future ones and so forth. So when you then old 3 weeks old fetus, and then the different states of a fetus, the things become very bizarre. At one point, there is not even distinct cells, but the cells look exactly the same. There's just a mass of cells which are looking exactly like the fertilized egg in the beginning. And at one point, there's only the fertilized egg. So through all that, there is moments of mind that are causes for later moments of mind. They're getting obviously more and more bizarre. We cannot even imagine what it was like to experience to be a mind in this kind of mass of identical cells, or to be a mind just in the fertilized egg. Yeah, but that's how the whole chain of causes of previous moments of mind causing later moments of mind, how far it goes back. So you have this mind in the fertilized egg, yeah, this kind of the first moment of the mind of this life. But this mind is mind. It is not physical. It is just clear knowing, doesn't have color, doesn't have shape. It is impermanent. It is a cause for the future moment of mind, and it is caused by a previous moment of mind, because it is mind. That's the very facts about mind. So this very first moment in the fertilized egg of mind, that we cannot imagine what was its object, how did it feel, how it's very, very difficult to relate to that. But this thing was mind, because it was mind, the first moment of mind, it had a cause. And that cause was not of this life. Had nothing to do with this fertilized egg. There was a moment of mind before the first moment of mind. Yeah, kind of the causal moment of mind for the first moment of this life. So this is also a mind, causal moment for this mind, for the present life's mind, and this mind is also clear knowing, is also impermanent, has itself a cause, and is not of this life. So to some extent, just to make a course presentation, it is of the previous life. It's a little bit more complex than that. They say there is a certain intermediate state between lives. So actually it would be of that state. But anyway, there is a moment of mind, therefore of life, of experience, and it is our life, it is our experience that is not of this life. And then, of course, that moment, which is really amazing to think about that this even happened, a moment that in no way was connected with this very body here in any form, for example, in the form of fertilized egg, that mind had a cause itself. And that one has a cause itself. And further and further and further. And there is no limit. So that's the next thing that is kind of shocking for the West. The West is thinking in terms of, I mean, not the West, but like human beings, I would say. is thinking about things like they have a clear start and a clear end. Yeah, and so even science would go back to the Big Bang, and that's it. They wouldn't go further than that. Or in most religions, you have a creator God that created the world, and from there on you had it, and now it's there, and now it's developing. So the funny thing is that these religions, they can imagine that there's an eternal life into the future, but they cannot imagine that there was no beginning in the past. They want to have a beginning. There needs to be a creation of times. It needs to start somewhere, but please, it should not end. So Buddhism says this is pretty illogical. Actually, something like here, what we see here with the mind, has no beginning. There is no first moment, because whatever previous moment you will find of mind that is causing the later moments is itself impermanent. So it is a cause for the later ones, but it is caused by the previous ones. There's always a previous one for that. There is no beginning for mind. So that means we didn't only have a previous life, we had many previous lives. We had limitless previous lives. We were already everything. Everything possible to be, we have been, and we have been in myriads of times. So that's quite interesting. This gives you something to think if you turn on the television and you see all the people running around there in their different bodies, in their different shapes, in their different languages maybe, or cultures, or in the different affluence or poverty, or in the different sickness and so forth. Well, actually, if you think about the past eternity, we might have been each of this. Whatever you see there, whatever sickness you see there, whatever health you see there, whatever male or female body you see, whatever human body or animal body, and so forth, we were like that or something very similar to that. This has an incredible inclination. This has, for example, the inclination, I have not just physically been very similar to that, I have also mentally been very similar to that. So that means if I really understand what it means to be alive and to have a mind, like different from the sun or from water or from the universe or from light rays, none of this is alive. None of this has a mind. But if you understand that I'm alive, I have a mind, I have consciousness, I'm amazing, amazing phenomenon in the universe. What this means, that I have no beginning, that I have been in all kinds of states of minds, minds that belong to the human realm, minds that belong to other realms, minds that are kind of, if this makes any sense, that are male and minds that are female just because they have a male and female body, or minds that have come from that culture or that culture, and so forth. Yeah? So a lot comes from this. For example, we cannot really say that we don't understand what the other person wants or wishes or thinks, or how can you think like that? Because we did think like that. Any kind of person we see in the television, let's say any kind of world leader, and let's say some of them are very ethical, some of them are not so ethical, some of them are very conscious and so forth. We can understand all of that because we have been all of that. But that's just on a side note. The main point right now is that there is past lives by way of the very nature of mind. That the mind is not having color or shape. It is not physical. It is not bound to the destiny of the body, while obviously it is very strongly intertwined with the body, very strongly influenced by what happens to the body and so on, uses the body even to see, to hear, to smell and so forth, which it doesn't have to do because the person in the operation was hearing and seeing quite fine without his eyes functioning and without the ears functioning. Really amazing. But right now we are in a state where our mind is such intertwined with the body that we see only what our eyes see, and we hear only what our eyes hear, what our ears hear. So nevertheless, although there's this strong interaction, and if you take drugs, it will change your way of perception, and if you have certain hormones which are physical going on, it will do something to your perception. So nevertheless, what's the color of your mind? There's no color to the mind, there's no shape, because it's not physical. So it's a non-physical phenomenon. It is not permanent, it changes, although it is eternal. It is caused, it has previous causes, and if you think this whole, the previous causes Some of them will be exactly of the same substance. That will have to be mind themselves. Only mind can create mind. So if you follow that through, you come through these different states of a human life, to the fetus, to the first moment of a fertilized egg, and then the moment before, and then the moments before. And the moments add up to huge quantities of time and whole lives, and many, many lives and eons. So that's very important. And this is how Buddhism would establish that there is past lives. And for Buddhism, this is an established fact. It is not something that you believe and it's your choice or something like this. There is past and future lives if you believe in them or not. In the same way that there is, I don't know, what could we say, uh, that the heart, I think, if I'm not wrong, the heart has two chambers if you believe it or not. Is it like that? The heart has two chambers? I think it has two chambers, no? Anyway, I don't know. So whatever is true about you physically, yeah? Like how many ribs you have. If you believe that or not, you will have that many ribs. So for Buddhism, this is really fact, a description of fact. It is not something that is kind of an interesting thought or something that you could apply in order to have a better life or to think different about your own life or about the world and so on. It is fact. This is how mind is. And so we were talking about now how this goes into the past, how there is no beginning for the mind and there was a life before this life, or at least experience before this life and so forth, and many experiences. But the same thing, of course, goes the other way around. We were talking about that the present mind is impermanent because it is caused by a previous moment of mind. But I said several times already, what is a result is also a cause. So it itself is cause, so it is a result. But it itself, this very result, becomes the cause for the future moment. It becomes the substantial cause. The present moment of mind becomes the cause that brings about that the next phenomenon that is produced from it is not matter or something else, but it is also mind. It's a substantial cause. So the present moment of mind that is cause itself will cause the next moment of mind, which will cause the next moment of mind. So when we are 60, there will be a mind. It will be probably different from the one that we have now. Many different opinions or flexibility will probably decrease unless we do something about that, and many other things. And then there will be maybe one for 80 or even 90, even 100, or maybe in the end when we get dementia and so forth. Yeah? And it's going to be a mind. It's going to be clear knowing. It's going to be not so sharp maybe anymore. It will not remember and so forth. But it's going to be our mind because it's in our continuum. And it will be caused substantially by our present mind. And it will be something clear knowing. It will be of us. It will be not non-material. And it will be caused by the present moment. And it will cause a moment after. Another moment of dementia. Yet another a moment of dementia. A moment of further decrease. And finally, the moments of the death process. So in the death process, what is happening is that Buddhism is speaking that we have different levels of mind happening at the same time. So we have sensory minds, we have conceptual minds, thoughts, which are not using the eye senses or the ear or the tongue, but it is like a memory or a thought, or like if you debate something or if you use logic or language and so forth. So this is a conceptual mind. And they say that the sensual minds, they are coarser, rougher than the conceptual ones. But then there's also other minds which are kind of finer. They're still conceptual, but then they're more subtle, and you can get even more subtle than that. And in the death process, what is happening is that the coarser minds dissolve into the subtler minds, and those dissolve into even subtler minds, and further on and further on. So in other words, all that complexity of our mental setup that developed through the unperceivable process of the fetus, and then even afterwards, after birth, all of that is now reversed. All this, production of different levels of mind are now dissolved again. What has been constructed is now deconstructed. That's the actual death process. And so the mind gets more and more detached also from different functions of the body. It's no longer using the eyes, the ears, the tongue, and so forth. There's many other phenomena that come together with that. But what I'm saying is, it is a mind that is even very, very different from the mind of the person who is 90 and has dementia. It's going to be way way different from that, and is again mind in your own continuum, which comes substantially caused from the dimension mind, which comes substantially caused from the mind of the 60-year-old, which comes from your very mind right now. And then in this death process, it will go into even subtler states, and there's a so-called subtler state, the so-called clear light of death. So this clear light mind is then that what is actually leaving the body, just as at birth, a very subtle mind has entered the fertilized egg. And that's why we are leaving from this planet, not just without our relationships and our resources, but even without our body. We have nothing apart from the mind, which has tremendously transformed from what we know about our mind right now. But it is there, and it is alive, and it feels, and it has all the Buddha potential on it. It has all the potential for different rebirths and so forth, to identify with other fertilized eggs and so forth. And so this last moment that is belonging to this life, which is a very subtle type of mind, and again, difficult for us to understand or to imagine what this would be like. This last moment of life is caused by the previous, which is already very, very subtle. So it's a result, and every result is a cause. So this very last moment, this incredibly subtle type of mind, this incredibly subtle form of clear knowing, this incredible subtle non-material phenomenon will give rise to another mind, which is no longer connected to this body in any form. And that one is going to be its result, and that result is going to be a cause for a second moment after, and then a third and a fourth, and it's going to go on like this all the way, again, into eternity. So what this means is that we will never, like, I don't know, this is probably a provocative sentence, but maybe people would debate me on this, but I say what this, and to some extent, means is we will never ever die. There will always be experience. If you would define life as such that you have experiences and feelings and so forth, yeah, so this kind of life will never end. But normally this is not enough for us. We don't want just to be alive. We want to be alive in a certain form. We want to be, maybe, let's say, intelligent or creative or emotional or romantic or something. So all of that world, the world of what you're debating, what you're discussing about politics, society, economics, the world of your emotions, your relationships, family, and so on, all of this will be gone, will be no longer the object of that mind, but that mind will be alive. And will enter into another world, and will again construct coarser levels of mind, and will again use sensory objects or sensory faculties of a body. Let's say it takes a human rebirth, and then cognition and thoughts, and will learn languages. That babies learn languages is an amazing phenomenon in itself. Yeah, so you cannot instruct babies actually on language because they don't understand your language when you try to instruct them. You cannot teach them actually grammar or verbs or adjectives. And every one of us has learned it. It's really amazing. I read something on this, and the person writing this was saying, this is the greatest intellectual feat that anyone in his life is ever achieving. That you learned your home country's language as a toddler, as a baby. So you will do this again, as you have done it so often. You have learned so many languages, it's unbelievable how many languages you have learned in this way. And you will do this again, and you will again participate in a world with all kind of economics and relationships and philosophy and history and everything, and art and I don't know what, yeah, and fears and violence and crime and all of this, and then you're going to die out of this, going back to the subtlest mind and disconnect from that body and go to another fertilizer and go on like that. So you can already get a little bit of the taste of the middle scope being. There's things like, I had enough of that. I don't want to reconnect with another bubble. I want to live in a very different way. But we are talking about the one of the small scope. The small scope one is completely clear that there's past and future lives by not just having kind of talked a little bit or thought a little bit about what we're talking here, about this causation and the results of mind and what mind is and so forth, how it's eternal in past and future. But he has actually meditated on this. He's really integrating this into his life. He perceives the world on that basis. He sees the people around him also having this kind of minds, changing. He's perceiving death no longer as something that he just doesn't want to talk about, but he observes how this person's mind in the death process is now getting more and more changed. Or he observes little children with a very different interest. He really wants to see how this is happening, how people are educated, how people are changing, how people are developing these different minds, or with old people, how they're dissolving, how they're losing it, and so forth. So he's really basing his life and his daily activity on that fact. He has integrated into his life the fact of death. And so then he becomes very interested in not just that there is this continuity, but he asks another question. He says, okay, so if it's true that me and everybody around me is coming into this life by way of a very subtle mind identifying with a fertilized egg, then that's not all, right? So we have many things to say about this, because some people identify with a fertilized egg that is of parents which are healthy. And so he has a wonderful infancy, or like the fetus development, there's no problem. And then he's born and is healthy and continues from there. And I don't know if this was happening in Romania as well, but I think in the, I don't know, when was that? Maybe in the 70s, I don't know, maybe in the 60s, there was a medication which was called Contagan. And this one was in order to take away a lot of the pain that women have during the pregnancy. And only later they found out that this medication actually had the effect that the limbs of the babies were not developing well. So there were people born with hands right up here on the shoulder that didn't have arms. Or actually, I had a friend who had one arm completely thin, which just the bone, it was not developed and so forth. So why is that? How is this that some people are getting born there, where there is this, where the parents even are healthy, but there's this kind of misunderstanding with regard to medication that has a huge impact on the person's life. And other people are born completely healthy, have no problem with their body development. How is it that some people are actually born to sick parents? Like there's babies that are born from parents, from a mother that has AIDS, and the baby is born with AIDS. That's going to be a major factor in the life of this being. And not only that, but then there's those who are born into a family that is rich and or well off, and others are born into a poor family. All of us, for example, we have been born into the first world, but then the most human beings are living in the third world. So why is that? So it's not just the process of mind giving rise to another mind, and mind identifying with the fertilized egg and becoming a human being and then going to another life. But this life has a very specific quality, and it could be something very different. As I said, when you turn on the television, what you see there, you could be any of that, but you're not. You're this. So then the person is asking, so why does it develop in this way? And then the Buddha gives teachings on how while the mind is a substantial cause for a later moment of mind, what comes into this whole process of rebirth is karma. That there is a factor which is, again, difficult to grasp what this actually is. It is not a mind. It is another type of factor. It's also not physical. It's very difficult to grasp what it is. It's this phenomenon of karma is a factor that is determining what kind of rebirth you are taking, what shape this rebirth is going to take. Again, yeah. For example, if you're a woman or a man, or if you're on a planet where this is the division of gender, maybe there's other life forms which have 4 genders or just 1 gender. Yeah. So, but here on this planet, there was, if you become a human, you will be one of the 2. Nowadays, actually, they have this debate about the gender debate. How you call this? That there is people who have both genders or whatever, or the changed gender. So all quite interesting from a point of view of karma. Yeah, what happened there? Why did they end up in this situation, which is very stressful in their life? so that they later on cannot live with that body that they got from the beginning, and they change their gender full on. So they were born like this. So all of this is coming from karmic inputs, and also that you're born into the first world or the third world is coming from karmic inputs. And this is simply true about this life. Yeah? It doesn't tell you anything about yourself. What it tells you is that there was someone in the long line of lives that you had. There was somewhere in the past somebody who did certain actions which left something in your mind that is not mind, that is not matter, is karma, and that what has been done then is now ripening into this effect. For example, what I mean with this is, karma does not say that if somebody is born into the first world, he's a good person, and if he's born into the third world, he's a bad person. It's not like that. It doesn't tell you anything about your character. It is just the outcome of a certain action that happened somewhere in the past. It is true that if you were born into peace, health, prosperity, and so forth, this is outcome from positive actions that someone in your continuity did in the past, maybe even in different lives. And it is also true that you were born into a war or into with sickness and so forth, that this is due to the karmic outcome of. But the person that is born now here might be a very positive, a very virtuous person. So we cannot say that somebody is born sick or, let's say, handicapped is therefore kind of a bad person. It's not like this at all. This is a very frequent misunderstanding of karma. Yeah, I heard that somebody in England was a football trainer, and he was Buddhist, and he said that that handicapped people are so because of their own actions, because of karma. And this was such an outrage to the public that he was kicked out. He was fired for saying that. So that's really something to think about. Like when we have this idea that which I think in some psychology types, there's many different types of psychology, but in some types they say that we are born as a white sheet of paper, and then the parents and then the society and the education, they are printing on this white piece of paper, leaving all kind of imprints, and then the mix of all of this makes our character. This is not how Buddhism is describing it. Yeah, our character is coming from these previous habituations in past lives, all kind of habits, all kind of patterns, all kind of karmic outcomes, and so forth. Yeah? So in this way, we are coming into this life. So I think to not be able to think that somebody who is handicapped or who is born sick or something, that this person, to some extent, in his past, not in the present, but in the past, has set the causes for that. This is very this is difficult for the people to deal with, because they have this idea that the baby is pure and that white sheet of paper and is innocent and so forth. So actually, again, very interesting to observe little children, how innocent they really are, and what they actually sometimes do to their parents, what they do to other children and so on, and extremely young age already. So really, by own perception, observation, and this is really something that in Buddhism you have to do. You have to use your own observation, what you experience every day, what you can see with your own eyes, to base your understanding of life on these kind of observations. By your own observation, you can see that they are not all of the same characters, such that they're all white pieces of paper. You can see that they already have all kinds of afflictions, that they have attachments, desires, that they're angry, and so forth. Yeah, you can see that they're sometimes. I could tell you some stories about very small children already having a certain form of aggression and so forth. So Buddhism is definitely not subscribing to this, that we are born being pure and then something bad happens to us, but we are the complete outcome of our past actions. So this doesn't include that we are influenced by society and education and so forth. But again, that we are born into this society that gives you this kind of education and this kind of values, yeah, is again connected to your karma bringing you into this life. So I'm completely running out of time here, and I just have started about the practices of the being of the middle scope. So I have to hurry up a little bit. So I'm just saying that the Buddha is instigating this person to think along this kind of lines. And so as I said, in the end, the person is not just courageous enough to look at death and birth and rebirth and re-death and so forth, but he will actually take this on and will be very interested how this really functions in all its aspects. So first he understands that there will be future lives, there have been past lives, but now he understands even the subtleties of the process. He understands that karma is involved. And more precisely, what is involved is also many different realms of rebirth. Yeah, you can have a rebirth in the human realm. We were talking about first world, third world, and so forth, peace, war, rich, poor, sick, healthy, and so forth. But another observation which very important is to observe animals. And you will find out that animals are definitely having feelings, that they're definitely perceiving, that they're definitely having a memory, that it is indeed true that dogs are loyal. It is indeed true that cats are independent. It is indeed true that ants are building states. And if you check the material that is available, a wildlife documentary, you can find stuff that is just completely baffling. You can think about how birds build their nest. This is just complete architecture. I saw a documentary about birds on an island where there were no predators, there were no cats, no nothing. So they didn't have to live on the trees. So they lived on the floor, and they were dancing on the floor. They were cleaning the floor to have a dance floor, and then the guy would the he bird he would do a dance there, an actual ballet. He would cross his legs and go back and forth. And on one twig, on this one side, the females were sitting and were observing this. On another twig, the youngsters were sitting to learn from him how to do this dance. They have dance in the animal kingdom. They have architecture in the animal kingdom. They have states in the animal kingdom. It's amazing. So very, very close to us. And they cannot reflect on death. They cannot do philosophy. They cannot do meditation and so forth. So they are clearly differently from us, but they're clearly having mind. So if they have mind, their mind is also not material. It is also very strange that they are in this body in the first place. So again, by some kind of karmic force, they were ending up there. And their mind is just mind, just as our mind is just mind. So if the karmic forces are coming together, we can be ants. We can do state building in an ant state. We can do dance as a bird. We can do architecture and building houses and the home in different ways. We can be wolves. We can be anything. We can be snakes, insects, whatever. So then it starts to get a little bit scary. It's not just the people that we see in television. It is all the animal kingdom and all the insects. So this guy of the small scope is very interested in that because he feels, I don't want to be there. So the Buddha is describing, I'm sorry, I just have to pour this over you without giving more explanation, but the Buddha is actually describing three so-called, he describes 6 realms of rebirth. And he describes so-called 3 lower types of rebirth, because in these lower types, suffering, physical suffering, pain, and fear are predominant in comparison to whatever joy is possible in these realms. So in the upper realms, there's more joy than pain, and some of them is even high bliss. So maybe I'm so sorry, it's already 7:26, I'm sorry. So these realms are like this. They actually talk first of all about the animal realm. The animal realm is described by the Buddha as being full of violence. Of course, they have suffering of thirst and hunger and so forth. But mainly, the main thing about the animal realm is that the animal realm, the beings in the animal realm, are constantly living in the fear of being eaten alive. So I don't know how far this goes for pets that we have in our homes, but even there you can see that cats can be very quickly on their feet. Yeah? And even when they are dozing off, their ears are going all the time, checking. But this is the minority of beings in the animal realms. Most beings are out there. Any insect can be eaten by a bird anytime. Any small bird can be eaten by a bigger bird, by a cat, whatever, anytime. So they're actually eaten alive. So this might mean for a bug, for a little insect, that it is swallowed whole by the bird and then digested alive. So this is what's going on there. And of course, for us, it's kind of a little bit kind of funny to think about that a bug is digested alive in a bird. But the bug is experiencing this as his life. This is his body. He's just now ending up in a very dark place, which is full of acid that is dissolving his body. So that's kind of what's going on in these realms. And in comparison to that, there is description of two more realms which are much worse than that. And they are looking pretty much like the hells that we know from Christianity or that we know from ancient religions like the Greeks and so forth. Like, so one realm is called the hungry ghost realm. So this is a realm that is especially characterized by deprivation. You don't have access to food, you don't have access to water, but you constantly crave for that. Yeah, so you're actually constantly hungry and you're never satisfied. So for the time being, you have to leave it there. There's much more to be said about that. And then there's actual hells, even where they talk about that you have an experience of burning all the time. The Geshes would insist it is you actually take a body and you're actually burning. So many people just can't deal with this, so they try to say like it's something that you just dream up or something. But the Geshes would say you actually have a body and you're actually burning. And then they also talk about other hells which are full of darkness and cold, and you're splitting apart because like an ice crystal splits apart or something. So all kind of detailed explanations. I don't want to go there today in detail. Point is simply that the animal realm is very visible, is very clearly experienceable. We can clearly look at that, identify with that, try to feel into what this would be. And Buddhism is saying there is even worse than that. And they also say that the lifespan is increasing. Yeah, so the pretas are living very long, and the hell realms are also very long, and so forth. So all what I'm saying is the being of the small scope wants to avoid this kind of rebirth at any cost. So it becomes very interested in what kind of actions are bringing about karma, so that the never-ending line of consciousness would end up there. He doesn't want to go into these very bizarre realms like hells and prison realms, but he doesn't want to go into the animal realm also. Yeah, so let's say he wants to stay in as a human being, then there's talk about God realms and so forth, very blissful experiences. At least he doesn't want to go to this lower realm. So this is what he actually wants to achieve. This is his spiritual practice. He is completely living in the cosmic aspect of our life, that we are without beginning and without end, that mind is changing through tremendous transformations from one life to another life, that there have been many lives, there will be many lives, and he wants to become a master over this process. He wants to understand karma. He wants to understand the different possibilities of rebirth that there are, and then try to avoid the lower rebirth, take higher rebirths, and do this by way of bringing together the causes for that. So I can just kind of quickly say that. So it's all about the karmic causes for this kind of rebirth. The main karmic cause will be ethical discipline, that you have ethics, that you don't, especially like consciously, deliberately abstain from harming others, physically, verbally, even in your thoughts. Yeah, so this is a main practice, a main cause that is, all of this is action to avoid this kind of violent behavior, is action such that it is karma. Karma actually means action. And this karma leaves a karmic imprint that brings about results in the future. So this is the main thing. Yeah, the ethics such that you don't harm others. There's a lot to be said about this as well. Of course, there's a very detailed presentation of what ethical discipline looks like, what are the different factors and so forth. So the being of the small group is interested in all these teachings, because this is exactly what he wants to practice now that he has understood about life, death, rebirth, how he has understood about the beginningless and endlessness of the mind, has understood how karma is influencing what kind of rebirth he takes, has understood what kind of rebirths there are. So the low rebirth would then be based on a lack of ethics or on violent behavior. And so he wants to really work with his mind that he doesn't do this kind of activities. again, physically or verbally or even mentally, and instead achieve the positive side, positive supporting states of mind for others as a basis, as a karmic cause for higher rebirth. Yeah, and in this way, he is practicing. So one of the main topics here would actually be taking refuge, which is again a huge topic. So when he understands, again, I'm going to be very short. When he understands where he is, that he can die any moment, that his mind will continue, that his mind has the potential to do animal wrongs or worse, that his mind has obviously the potential to become a human being again, or even better, that this is determined by way of karma, especially ethics, and maybe also some prayers. You can accumulate virtuous activity and then dedicate it by prayers. May there be this kind of result, so you can really influence the process of your death. And you need to do this because otherwise there is a real danger of going down there into the animal realm. Just on a side note, there's by far more living beings in the animal realm than there are in the human realm. 7 billion people is nothing in comparison to what's going on in the animal realm. So number-wise, statistic-wise, if you want to look at statistics, it's more than likely that you're going to be born in the animal realm. So real inner strong movement, motivation, being moved by the wish, I'm gonna take my mind into my own hands and make sure that the death process is gonna turn out positive. I will not go to the lower realms because it's in my hands. And how this is in my hands is taught by the Buddha, and I'm gonna rely on the Buddha. So you could say, but what he's doing, he's again, a very problematic word, but this is the word in Tibetan. He's developing fear with regard to the lower realms. And this fear is one of the causes of going for refuge to Buddha Dharma Sangha. The other cause is understanding the high qualities of somebody who is completely enlightened, of somebody who is out of compassion and only out of compassion, teaching these things in order to clarify things, in order to empower us over our own life and death and rebirth and so forth. So having a certain, let's say, concern, kind of really fear is in the end hitting it, of having to go down into a very painful or bizarre state of life. He goes for refuge to those who have these good qualities and who are teaching a path, in his case, on this level, because refuge has many different levels. On this level, they're teaching a path of mastering the death process. Yeah, so in this way, he's relying on them, relying on their teachings on karma, relying on their teachings on ethics and so forth, and is then engaging on the basis of this refuge into this practice, especially of ethical discipline. That's it in a nutshell. That's the short version. Okay, anyway, maybe I hope I touched on everything somehow. There's a lot to be said about refuge. Yeah, we will see about that. Maybe we can do it in the fourth session, or maybe I can bring a little bit about refuge here and there, or also the next sessions. Yeah, we will see about that. So time is completely up. If there's still some questions, if somebody would have a question, I would be very happy to answer that. If people still feel like that.
How comes that if we've been everything, we haven't been a Buddha yet?
Yeah, so why would have we not become a Buddha? So a Buddha, you don't really become out of karma. So karma, Buddha is not part of samsara. Yeah. So everything that we have become right now, you could say, is all these afflicted states. So if you turn on the television, unless you have His Holiness Dalai Lama on the screen, what you're seeing is just samsara happening. It's just people following their attachment, following their jealousy, following their desires, following their anger, following their laziness, following their what have you. Yeah. So that's what's actually going on there. So that's what we all have been. We have been, like some people have a stronger problem with pride than others. Others have a stronger problem with anger and so forth. But we have been all that. We have all been in lives where we had a stronger problem with anger or with pride or what have you. So these afflicted things we have all been. But for the Buddha, you have to do an amazing amount of practice and is really, really a high attainment. So it's not part of that thing that in samsara we have been everything. Like being a Buddha or being liberated from samsara is, for example, a result that cannot be reversed. Yeah. So if you would be liberated from samsara, you would not have kind of a time where you are liberated and then later on you're again in samsara. So that we are here is clearly showing that we have never reached liberation or Buddhahood. So this kind of attainments are very based on very specific paths and behavior, which are not very obvious. That's why the Buddha had to come and be a teacher to us and describe all this path, even with regard to rebirth. So that's a little bit kind of technically speaking, we are how it comes that after all this long time that has passed, all this eternity of our mind, that we have not become enlightened, is because we haven't brought together the causes and conditions for it, which means we haven't practiced the path, which we did do because we didn't have the information, and also because we were strongly under the influence of our afflictions.
All right.
Anything else? Everything completely crystal clear? To be honest, there can't be. Can't be crystal clear. Okay, anyway, if there's no questions, then we can stop here for a day, no?
If some question will pop up, I will send it by email. Is it okay?
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good, and I can talk about it next time. Did you do this the meditation before the session?
Today we didn't have time. We are sorry we didn't do it.
Yes, well, that's quite a powerful thing to do before the session, yeah? To establish calm in the mind and then a motivation why you want to do this even. And when we understand something about refuge, then you would also take refuge at that point. And this way it would become a Buddhist practice. So very good to do this in the future. I hope you have time next time. And yeah, so you will meet to do a discussion group on this?
Yes. Maybe also by email we can discuss about some points for the next discussion group. Or you can tell us now some discussion points.
I mean, first of all, it would be good if you could discuss together what you think is this being of the small scope, and then you can check if you have a correct understanding or what understanding you have and so forth. What is the motivation of somebody of that type? What kind of practice would he do? And normally it's very necessary to discuss the lower realms. Yeah, if you think it is possible that you could be reborn, and if so, as an animal. Could there be something worse than that? I mean, I didn't give you much information about health and greater realms, so maybe there's no point to discuss that because you don't have information about that. But the animal realm, I think, is already very, very powerful to think about the animal realm.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Wonderful. In this sense, I would say you were a wonderful audience. Maybe we should spend a moment at least to dedicate the positive potential that we have accumulated in this way. So the point is this whole teaching on karma is saying that the mind has the potential to produce this kind of again immaterial substances of karma. And so by having made some effort with regard to these topics of the path of the Buddha and listening to some of the teachings of the Buddha, with some interest and some concentration, with a good motivation, whatever our motivation was, our mind has naturally produced positive energy, if you like, positive potential, positive karma. And so positive karma is such that you can only ripen into something positive. But there's many different types of happiness or positive outcomes. So by dedication, you can send this positive energy into the right direction. So we want to dedicate this right energy that we have generated today in order to be able to explore all these topics more and more, become more knowledgeable about them, really be able to analyze them and dig them and see what is true in them and what not, what we feel like is not true, to be really analyzing. And we want to use this energy in order to be able to be courageous enough to actually look at our mind and its potential. And in general, we can dedicate it so that we and everybody around us, everybody in the room, everybody in the city, everybody on the planet, and all beings may attain to highest goals, highest liberations, highest peace, highest love and compassion. And then I thank you very much, and I wish you a nice evening.
Thank you very much.
To far distant Romania, to my favorite Romanian city of Cluj. And we're gonna see each other in 2 weeks, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So next time I try to talk a little bit about the being of the middle scope. So somebody who actually wants to crush the whole structure of samsara.
All right.
So see you there. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.